And we're live. I like to do that all the time. Do you
Mhm.
see that you are live on the screen? Did you see the text?
Yes, yes, I did.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly do that. I'll just do like a quote, just
Yeah.
to say we're live, and
Do you want me
yeah,
to reblog it? I mean, not
yeah,
reblog
yeah.
it, not
You
HMI.
could. I mean, that'll be good. Yeah, that'll be good.
Yeah.
I think I might quote yours
Yep,
and just yeah,
perfect.
I think that just makes sense. So we're live. Amazing. Okay.
Okay, let me
Live.
repost that and we'll get some
Yep.
um, people here.
Join in. Um uh, I think I'll just say we're live. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go through things. All right. So I'll just
Mm,
start already. So
okay.
yeah. So once people join in and the more they join, they can get up to speed, and then we could take questions. So basically, this is how it goes. So I'll start with the intro, and then when more people join in, and they eventually have questions, then we can take up questions. So
Okay.
it's more or less a casual chat, or I usually call it coffee chat, but I realized that my coffee chats were always evenings. So I was and there's no there's no how I'm having coffee. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I just decided to call. I think you called it a webinar, so I was like, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Let's even do a webinar.
Yeah, I just call them,
Yeah,
I call everything a
yeah.
webinar. Or what did they call them? Fireside chats as well.
Yeah, that too as well. So, yeah, so hi everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us today. So I don't know if I should maybe wait for like 3 minutes so we get more people in before we
Yeah,
start.
yeah, let's
Yeah,
give
that
them
makes
two
sense.
more minutes.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right. So let's
Mm,
do that.
I've reposted it anyway as well. So,
Okay,
um,
amazing. Right. Live. Kidoki. Like I feel like this topic is a very interesting one. Very, very interesting one, especially right now.
yeah,
And I don't want to be like, oh, something is trending and that's what we're talking about it. I love the angle we're coming from. I love that we're coming
yeah,
from a more practical angle and not just recycling what everyone has been saying online about AI coming for technical writers or AI coming for your job. So I love the
yeah.
fact that I love the angle this conversation is about to take. And
Mm,
I feel like it's going to be very relevant to people, especially people who come back to watch the recording. And so yeah, so I think in
yeah,
2 more minutes, let's just say 2 more minutes, we'll give
yeah.
it a go. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, I think so as well. I think
Yeah,
it's
all right.
you need to have a pragmatic approach to it. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it gets so, what would you say, polarizing. It's like, oh, it's coming for our jobs, or this is the best thing that's ever happened to our jobs, and it's
Yeah.
like, I feel like there's also like something to be said about like just seeing it as like a set of tooling that optimizes your
Mhm,
role. So
mhm.
like, I don't think it's coming for our jobs in that sense. I think it's just changing our roles. It's evolving like every other tool that comes to it.
Yeah.
Like the same as I'm sure people thought the same when it was like when the internet arrived, or like the death of the PDF, and like where like when all this new tooling comes along, I think it's just the fear of change quite a lot,
Mhm.
in my opinion. And when you start seeing it as tooling that optimizes your work, I think that helps.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, it's optimization, not replacement. That's what I
Mhm.
always
That's a very good way to put it.
say.
I don't think I've heard anyone call it that. Yeah.
Mm,
So, hi everyone. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. So, I'm Deborah Emeni. I work as a senior technical writer, and I'm really excited about today's webinar. So, over the past year, I believe, or we've seen that AI has become part of so many conversations in technical writing, and we're now hearing more about things like strategy, or you have to become more strategy aligned, or we are hearing things like ownership, right? We're hearing things like
mhm,
docs as product, like Gareth calls it. We're hearing
mm,
things like automation, which is very popular, and also when it comes to demonstrating the value of technical writing as a whole or documentation. So those are to me, very great conversations to have. But there's one question that keeps coming up, which is, what does all of this look like in practice? Because if we keep talking about it and we don't actually we don't boil it down to the practical sense, where we're like, okay, this is how you can apply this to your work, and this is what you can do. If there aren't any actionable items at the end of the day, we're just talking. So that's the main question here. What does all of this actually look like in practice? And that's exactly what today's conversation is about. So rather than talking about AI on its own, we're discussing what these changes mean for technical writers and how documentation teams are thinking about them, and some practical ideas you can take back into your own work. So we'll also leave some time at the end of the questions to for anything that comes to mind while we're chatting. You can feel free to drop it in the chat in the YouTube comment section. So yeah, so today I'm here with Gareth, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Gareth Brinn. So Gareth is documentation manager who has spent the past few years leading documentation teams through many of the changes we're seeing today, including AI assisted workflows, Docs as code, documentation strategy, and Docs as product, which I love that term. So he's also the creator of the Find, Scan, Read framework, and he was recognized as one of the top 10 global writers in the 2025 Document 360 Global Writers Awards. Cool. So, Gareth, thank you so much for joining me today. We have a star in our midst. So, yeah. So, quick question. Let's just get right into it. So, if Gareth, if you were, or rather, if you look at technical writing today compared to even 2 or 3 years ago, what do you think has changed the most? Because one thing we hear a lot is that technical writers need to become more strategic because of
Mm.
the fact that AI is here. You understand? And so, what? Why do you think that conversation has become so important? So the question is basically, what do you think has changed the most now that comparing technical writing? We're not talking about AI yet. We're like, okay,
Mm.
comparing technical writing from now, yeah, compared to technical writing in back in 2020 or 2022. What do you think has changed the most?
I think there is a kind of a greater sense of independence within the community. I think when I
Okay.
first joined technical writing about 5 years ago now, it's one of those things where I noticed kind of the trends where like a lot of SME interviews, a lot of like
Yeah.
collaboration, a lot of time spent kind of in meetings with each other or with SMEs. And what I'm kind of finding now is it's becoming way more independent, at least from my point of view, where it's
Okay.
like there's more ownership within documentation and there's greater like understanding needed. Like I don't want to say pressure, but it's like SMEs come in when needed. So rather than having
Mhm.
that kind of like maybe that closer relationship that we had in the past, because like
Yeah.
everyone was like has insane diaries these days, that it's more there's more of an expectation to dive deeper into the product. Like there always was, but I think it's just grown since then to
Okay.
kind of drive independence and see documentation more as like its own living organism rather than just an add-on. I think there's been greater pushes to get documentation as part of the definition of done in quite a lot of places. And
Mhm.
how do we make sure that like it ships with code when the rise of docs as code and implementing all that framework. And then there's also a greater focus, I think, on docs as a form of self-service within products, which I
Yeah.
think docs was always seen as like troubleshooting guide. So like something you came to when something went wrong. Whereas what I'm seeing now is you're a greater like we want to drive user autonomy. Like we want to make sure that users from install to configuration to troubleshooting, they can do it all rather than I think in the past, like you think of like help centers, like one of the first things that I started writing was help centers, and that's only troubleshooting really. It's like how do I log in? My
Yeah.
payment failed, things like that, where it's more like I want to do this complex workflow. How do I do it? And it's not necessarily just because you run into an issue, it's just you want to learn. So we're becoming like
Yeah.
learning assets as well. So I'm
Mhm.
seeing a greater reach for documentation. And I think our area of like expertise is expanding beyond just how do I get a user out of a sticky situation.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So I think the following question. I think I should ask this. So, like, I've been very curious myself. So, when did you start thinking about technical writing as more than just creating documentation? Because when people talk about, oh, technical writing has changed or technical writing is changing, they're not like thinking toward or rather on the lens of, oh, technical writing is becoming more than just creating documentation. So, do you think that way as well? And if you do, when did you start thinking?
So
Yeah,
like I've always seen documentation and overall user experience in docs as
yeah,
a
okay.
massive asset because like I did a master's in technical communication, and one of the
Oh,
things that I looked at was like one of my theses was like looking at like the social impact of documentation. So like
okay.
how does it affect like minority communities? Like if you're thinking like immigrants that come to a country as like asylum seekers and they're handed a document that tells them like what a procedure is or how to do something and they have little English, like
Yeah,
the effect like that document could have on their lives and how it needs to be presented to them. So I've
mm,
always seen like through that kind of research um how it can really drive like social and kind of political and whatever kind of economic powers there is. So like always had that mindset of like documentation is way bigger than any of us like
yeah,
realize, or like that only a certain amount of us realize. Like you think about in healthcare when a doctor hands you like even like a brochure or a pamphlet, the way that articulates like whatever health issue is on that, like that could be a
yeah,
defining factor in how it frames your thinking about it. So
mhm,
like I've always had that mindset, and I think when I first got into technical writing, it was like more just focused on like, okay, we're just going to get this article out there to make sure that like people can do this certain task. Whereas now I'm seeing the mass shift in like self-service, and it's
yeah,
I think that really shows like the wider impact of it. It's like not only are we like just trying to create like documentation, we're also creating an experience, we're creating maybe a lifestyle, maybe a whole ecosystem in the background depending on what technologies and hardware that you work at. um like you look at certain companies that are embedded everywhere, so it's
yeah,
like, and I think also like something that an old manager of mine told me is like you should, or an old mentor of mine told me was, as well with documentation, like sometimes we kind of get siloed. And a great way of looking at it was, don't like if you're ever worried about like what industry am I in, like documentation, like I'm doing it for like maybe software or hardware, but I don't like that. Maybe that wasn't your passion. Maybe that isn't the area. And what she said to me was, look beyond that. So like if you're building hardware for like medical devices, for example, all the
yeah,
people that's helping. If you're creating software for something that's used by the government, how you're making life easier for those people. So like to look beyond documentation and looking at like your wider impact, knowing that
yeah,
somebody in those industries could be using your documentation to complete an important task that has a massive knock-on effect. So I think you have to look at it in a massive like holistic way and like the domino effect of that. So that's the way that I look at it. And that's the
okay,
way I've always looked at it. And then when I kind of like got into software, looking beyond the initial documentation and the initial kind of like, oh, I'm documenting software. No, I'm documenting software that does X, Y, and Z that allows people to do A, B, C. And
mhm,
that mindset then really motivates me and drives me, knowing like who relies on the documentation and how it
yeah.
drives their autonomy to help other people.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's a really great way to put it. I love the fact that you're basically saying okay, move your focus away from just writing this document or writing this documentation to seeing the impact and the outcome. So it's like moving away from seeing documentation as just this draft or document
Yeah.
sitting somewhere to, oh, what does the documentation help the users do? What does it help them accomplish? So that's like a very good way to say it. I love
Mhm.
that. So like so now moving on to AI.
Mhm.
Now I'm trying to introduce AI to the conversation. Everyone is talking about AI. So since
Yeah.
we're having a lot of discussion about AI right now in the technical writing community, from your perspective, where does it genuinely add value? Where do you think AI genuinely adds value in a documentation workflow as of
So,
today? Yeah.
so the first place that I genuinely saw the impact of AI and how it helped me with technical writing was understanding the technical side of it. So
Mm. Okay.
like no matter like you always have to learn technology, no matter how skilled you are technically.
Yeah.
Like if you start a new job or like they launch a new feature or they launch a new product, you're going to have to learn what that product is, no matter where you are. So for me, the greatest, like the first place where I saw, wow, this is really going to help me, is like, for example, like if an SME go, like if I ask an SME a question and they just hand me back a code repo and it's like your answer is here, like using AI then to like dig into that code repo. Maybe it's in a language that like a coding language that I just don't understand or I haven't seen in a while, or it's like, or it's in a certain structure that I'm not used to. So it's like finding those answers. And then also if they send me like a complex architecture diagram, like asking AI, like, help me understand this. What is going on here? And then what that really helped me do then is get that high level understanding at the very least.
Okay.
And it made me be more, it let me be more strategic. So then like I could walk into SME interviews instead of asking, hey, explain what does this feature do, which isn't the most beneficial. It was back in like the early days when everything was like a little more manual. But now I can walk into those
Yeah.
conversations and be like, hey Deborah, like I understand that this feature it does X, Y, and Z, but like this step 4, I'm kind of curious, does this happen at like phase 1 or phase 2? Or like if the user does this, what happens? So like you
Hmm.
can use AI in that sense. And that's where I found the benefit at the very beginning. And I was like, wow, there's something here that can help me optimize. And next thing, my like just interviews got better. And like I also got more independence from it. And then as AI evolved at the exponential rate that we've seen it evolve, what I've noticed is then it can help me like produce content and verify content faster. Um, so how does it like do that? Like by looking at code bases, like using AI browsers to look at like workflows and like say click through the UI and tell me what happens. So like it's those small pieces that kind of really help me. Or like if I'm like, oh no, like I need to get this document out today, I don't have an environment set up yet.
Yeah.
It's helped to then to just be like, hey, set up my environment. And then like you have a working environment all of a sudden. So
Yeah.
those
Makes
small
sense.
aspects and like using with like, hey, here's the code example. I need you to draft me an overview section for this document. And will it be perfect? Absolutely not. Especially if
Yeah.
you're only using like the chat, like the question answer responses.
Yeah.
Of course not. But like at the most basic level, that's how you like that's where you start with the optimization, really, when it comes to AI. So that's where I find it. And then obviously, like if you want, we can go into the complexities of how I've evolved that mindset into like AI pipelines and automations. But that's
Yeah.
like the absolute baseline where we've come, where I entered the AI optimization world.
Well, that's really cool. I love that you mentioned automation as well because I feel like that's where we are right now. I feel
Yeah.
like especially for the fact that you work in a team, so you're
Mm,
more or less, or rather, I said work in a team. You manage a team, so
mm,
you're more or less overseeing your operations and you're thinking on the lens of how do we automate this process? How do we automate this system? How do we
mm,
automate the system? How do we standardize this system?
mm,
Right.
mm.
So I guess
Yeah.
that's those are some of the things you do as a documentation manager. So, the way you would use AI, I suppose, would be different from the way an individual technical writer working in a team would use AI. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So when you say automation, can you like touch a little bit on that aspect? So, like, imagine, for you as a documentation manager, how do you use AI in your workflow without going into the nitty gritty of
Yeah.
things? Yeah. And
Um,
then, for someone in a team, someone like me, for instance, working in a team, and how do I leverage AI? So,
yeah.
or rather, how does AI fit? I think you can, yeah, touch on that if you can.
Yeah. So for me as a manager, it's kind of like what I always tell my team is like if you have to do something like a couple of times, just automate it. Like let's never look at it again. Like even if it's just a Python script, like not necessarily even using AI, I'm like just automate
Yeah.
it. And like
Yeah.
well, one thing that what I did as a manager was like set up a documentation like code base, we call it. Like it's a private repo full of
Yeah.
skills, automations, and workflows that we can all then pull on to say like, hey, I need a docs like verifier skill or a docs editor skill. It exists in this repo and we all have it locally. So then when we're building pipelines, it can start using like, hey, I think you should use this skill and pulling it all together. So
Mhm.
centralizing our thought process was something that I really wanted to do and
Okay.
start utilizing skills in that way to like really optimize us. And I do things like even just like today I was using Python to compare two Jira boards because I wanted to know, did the tickets on Jira board A map to the tickets on Jira board B? And I was like, I'm not going to go through every ticket. I simply do not have the time. So I'm like,
Yeah.
so I was like, I'm a big fan. My phrase that I always say to people is don't fix it, build it. And by that, I mean, if you see an issue, learn, fix it, obviously, patch whatever brought the issue up, but then build a system that that issue, like if it does arise, it fixes it automatically or it
Yeah.
just mitigates it altogether. So then
Mhm.
we never have to look at it again, especially when you're in a very lean team. If you're only like have two or three writers or like you don't have a whole army behind you, I think that's the only way to go is to say, okay, yeah, we're going to spend a little more time on this certain issue, but once we have that done, it'll be automated or we'll have some system set up that it's optimized to the best of our abilities.
Yeah.
And then what I like to do with my teams is like give them areas and just say like you own the AI and automations for these sections. So if it's like if somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I like doing like backlog tickets to keep the docs up to date," okay, but then like show me what are the analytics, like generate a dashboard, and like how are we automating it? Like what is the way to do that, and how? And I always challenge them to say, "Oh yeah, like I just do it manually," and I say, "Okay, but like if you could use AI or an automation, what would that look like?" And then
Yeah.
challenge them then to build out that pipeline that frees up their time then to focus on other things. Because when you're on a lean team, especially,
Yeah.
like there's always something else to do. So like
Mhm.
anything that can be automated is amazing. So in terms of me, it's more centralizing thought process and making sure everyone has access to the same quite literal skills and knowledge that we can
Yeah.
build off each other then. So then it becomes like almost like in documentation itself, like the chunking principle of like saying like or like single sourcing that everything is in one place and then you just grab what you need from it when you need it. So
Yeah.
that's how I like think of AI. I think of it more strategically. And
Mhm.
then but I also then look at like where in my team are we having bottlenecks? Like for example, one of the bottlenecks that I was like, it's like peer review, for example. Like, and then it's like, so one of the things that I've been looking at is like, one is a simple peer review and what is a complex peer review. And by that, then it's like, we built an AI pipeline that's like, I call it like the docs editor pipeline, which uses a set of skills then to just on an open PR, you just say, hey, use this pipeline, and it goes through it for style guide adherence. And then it
Okay.
catches all those things for you. Because like what we were noticing was like, especially when you have a high volume, is like through human error, like there might be a spelling mistake or like the grammar might be slightly off.
Yeah.
Through nobody's fault of their own. It's just like when you have high volume, things like that happen. So now with like an AI pipeline, then we were able to like knock out quite a lot of those issues. And
Mhm.
then what we also did was one of the writers on my team built like a veil automation then that has to run on every PR that really checks for style guide adherence. So we set up all these kind of little like check
Yeah.
gates that we can say to the best of our ability we mitigated against this. So I also try and think of that as well to say like one of the challenges that I set myself this week was like if somebody says to me, "Hey, I think this page might be out of date," I created a whole AI pipeline that like all I have to do now in Claude is say, "Here's the documentation page. This is the environment I want you to look at,
Yeah.
uh, and this is the code base that it's all wired up to." And just say, "Go for it. Tell me, is it technically accurate? Are the UI, are the steps in the UI accurate? And is it style guide adherence?" And it just opens a PR for me and says,
Mm.
"Here are all the necessary changes that now it's
Yeah.
complete today." So things like that, where without taking the human out of the loop, but just then like
Yeah.
when you don't have to go bother an SME about it. Like it's all done and dusted because I'm hooked up to the code
Yeah.
base and the UI.
Mm.
So we know for a fact that it's good, basically.
Yeah. That's really
Mhm,
cool. That's really
mhm,
cool. I think,
mhm,
and then it begs the question, because I think when you talk about where you introduce AI into your workflow or into your
mhm,
workflows in the documentation team. And then
mhm,
people are very curious. I think I've seen a couple of people ask the question, when do you think human judgment is essential? Because if we're introducing AI into the workflow, if we are automating several parts of the system or the workflow,
mhm.
right? At what point do we maintain that standard and ensure that the human remains in the loop? And what, like, if that makes sense, right? So, like,
Oh yeah,
at
yeah,
what, yeah, exactly. Because I feel like human judgment is still very much important, because many people hear like, oh, AI is coming to automate everything. And like, oh my God, then what do I do? I think
yeah,
I was in one meetup, technical writing meetup, and
yeah,
someone asked a question like, hey, I don't know if you were there. It was
mm,
writing docs, and someone was like, okay, so what do we do then? Because it was after a demo, and they showed how they set up the AI agentic workflow for their
mm,
documentation team, and it was a demo. It was a very cool demo, just like you
mm.
described. And someone asked the question, was like, okay, so where do we come in? What do we do?
Yeah,
What's our job? And so
yeah,
that's so my question is on the lines of, where do you think human judgment is essential now that we are automating parts of the documentation workflow?
yeah. So for me, there's a couple of facets to it. Like one, something that I always like to do as well is if AI were to fail or the automation were to fail, what's the
Yeah.
backup? What's plan B? So like,
Okay.
and I always think of it like in my head, like nodes, because we use like N8N. So like you have node one, two, three. And I always tell myself, like, I always looked at it in that way. I was like, if this workflow fails or process fails at A, B, or C, do we have humans that can step in and know what to do? So like having that understanding. So like I think that's a massive part of it as well for being human in the loop. Human
Yeah.
in the understanding is also essential that if it all comes crashing down tomorrow, can we keep the lights on? Um,
Yeah.
but for me, when it comes to specifically like content production for like feature work, for example, two things that I will never get rid of, at least not anytime soon, are when a PR is generated with new documentation, even if it's been wired up to the code base and it's been wired up to the UI, I still get an SME to go in and review the PR and then hit approve on it. So like every PR has to have an approval, and we do not, even if they message us being like, "Oh, it looks good to me," we tell them, "No, you have to go into the PR and hit approve," and we put in that gate because without it, then like without the human in the loop,
Yeah.
like it can you trust it? Probably because it's wired up in a
Mhm.
certain way, but let's not take that chance just in case. And then it's the same with a tech writer. Every tech writer has to sign off on every piece of documentation as well, no matter what. Even if we give them all the style guides, all the governance, if they open a PR, nothing can get merged without a tech writer approval. And so
Yeah.
that way, then it's also a chain of custody kind of thing. Like if a customer or prospect comes along and says, "Hey, this was wrong," or like it was out of date, and you're going, how can that be? And then you can trace it back to like who was involved and where did that information come from. So I think
Hmm.
that's also important. And then in terms of like what's next for us, like if like I always love that question when like I show people like AI workflows and they're like, so what will you do? And I'm like, oh, like 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 I always laugh at some people. I'm like, we're not sitting around waiting for like a flag to go up say we need documentation. Like it's the whole docs is product mindset then that you have to adopt. Like
Yeah.
you have to look at like the user experience. How is marketing using your doc site?
Yeah.
Are the sales team using your site? Where are they, like are solution engineers showing people the documentation, and where are those
Yeah.
people hitting those pain points? So you can
Hmm.
start looking at it as more holistically. And it could be like, hey, Garrett, like we could really use a better search feature. So then what you start doing is incorporating those like, or like they like that feature was really buried. Okay, do I need to rework like the information architecture in this section?
Yeah.
Maybe I just never had time for that before. So it's looking at all those overarching questions, and
Mhm.
also then what I find is technical writers have, yes, we're technical writers, but the skill set that we have is adaptable to many different areas. Like it's adaptable to like if you have a learning center, like well, I was at a Right to Docs meetup there last week, and it was about how they use documentation to build their learning center, which I thought
Yeah.
was really cool. So then you become like instructional designer all of a sudden, and I think that's really cool. Or it's like how can I contribute to UX copy? Or it's like if your company is bringing on-screen documentation, like you click a tooltip and it brings you up like how a policy or a configuration works. Like how can we get involved in that? Do we hook it up to our documentation or do we take a different approach? And so like you have to think of where can I fit in more and use my
Mm,
skills to boost that company even more. So you have to stop
mm.
thinking like, okay, yes, I'm a documentation specialist, but how can those skills be transferred across departments then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Support tickets, like do we like have a chatbot and do we need to clean up the language if we've built it ourselves? And do I need to start mapping out responses and what those responses look like and things
Yeah.
like that? So I think you start need to look beyond the page, quite early beyond the page, and just say
Yeah.
like, where can I be of greater benefit? And this is like something that I think is kind of sad, but it's a necessary thing. I think like the term technical writing is kind of dying slightly. Like we're seeing a massive shift towards like I've seen more and more people announce themselves as a content engineer than I ever have before. So which I think is good. I that would be if my title were to change. I think content engineering is probably the best way to put it at the moment.
Yeah.
Definitely not prompt engineer because I think we do way more than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's um I think we're evolving, and I think we need
Mhm.
to acknowledge that yes, we'll always be documentation specialists, but now we need to engineer content across the whole like product ecosystem or multiple product
Yeah.
ecosystems.
Yeah.
Um, I think that I just think it's an evolution that we all need to kind of like just get behind.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think to add to what you've said, I think if we're trying to be more strategic, because I think we've moved subtly moved the conversation towards more strategy, ownership, and
Mhm.
Doxus products. So we're like away from AI right now, a little bit, and but still banking on AI because I mean
Right.
that's like the foundation of this conversation. So like
Mhm.
I think it's very important for technical writers now
Mhm.
to be able to tie the documentation to business outcomes.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so like be able to see beyond individual pages, see the overall journey, see the
Mhm.
impact of documentation, see the usefulness from the user's perspective. So look beyond that. Like I feel like once you start to look beyond that, once you're able to
Mhm.
tie the documentation you're producing, and which is not like a one-time thing, you're
Yeah.
continuously producing and refining. Once you begin to look beyond that and and you're able to tie it to the business outcomes, and then you're not a mere documentation writer. You're like you. It's easier to show the value. I think that's where like we're going into right now. So we're like moving away from okay, how do I use AI to improve my workflow or my team's
Mhm.
workflow and stuff like that. We're now moving
Mhm.
toward okay, how do I show and demonstrate the value of documentation now that
Yeah.
AI has come to stay? So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Exactly.
that's like
Yeah.
my question. So like how do we demonstrate value? And another thing is now that we also talk about strategy, right? Where we talk about
Mhm.
the ownership. I think the key word
Mhm.
here is ownership.
Mhm.
So when you think about documentation today, do you think obviously you don't think more about individual pages from what you've said so far, you think about the
Mhm.
overall journey that someone is trying to complete.
Yeah.
So the question is, what does ownership look like in practice for um a technical writer on a team? So like for a technical writer like myself, how do I show more ownership? Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, no, that makes sense. And I think ownership is becoming a huge thing and holding yourself more accountable for the result of documentation. So
Yeah.
what I always tell people is like, because people come to me and say like, oh, this might not be your issue, but like this configuration was wrong on the doc side. I'm like, well, if it's on the doc side, it is my issue. Like at the end of the day,
Yeah.
I'm responsible
Yeah.
for the content that's on it. So I think if you're deferring it to say things like, oh yeah, you should talk to the engineers. I don't know anything about that. I just do what I'm told. Like that is like when they start like the vultures start circling, being like, what does
Exactly.
this person do? Like,
Exactly.
like it's more like, okay, yes, okay, that configuration's wrong. Let me fix it. And then you go
Yeah.
off and speak to the engineers and the product people, or like even if people are like, oh, this prospect like doesn't think the documentation has depth for them and they would like to speak to someone about it, and stepping up and saying, okay, let me hop on that call with them. And I know, like, as technical writers, like, we all got into writing, well, at least I did, to avoid conversations like that at the beginning. But like now it's like, okay, I'll step into that role and say, like, okay, if the prospect or the customer wants to speak about documentation and
Yeah.
how, like, tell us, like, give feedback about it, I will happily jump on that call and discuss it with them. Like, that is something that I've always advocated for, was like getting real customer feedback, and whether that's quantitative or qualitative, I think hearing it straight from like customers and prospects is such an amazing way to like learn about your documentation, because you learn about the human experience.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big there, or at least there was a big drive for like data driven approaches, and I still think that has a place, data
Mhm.
driven approaches. But I think if we're thinking like docs as a product, like, is it like you can hop on them with them and say, okay, was the search good enough? Did you use this tool? Did you notice that we had a chatbot? Like, was it that, like, oh, this was 6 layers deep and you gave up after 4 layers? Like, what are like the real issues affecting that human experience? So I
Mhm.
think owning ownership like that, and we're thinking like strategically, like, I think in a lot of places, like, tech writers often report into like somebody that sets the strategy for them. I don't know what, like, the best way to say that. Like, you think of like product engineering in some
Mhm.
capacity. And I
Yeah.
think ownership is like, instead of waiting for someone to tell you, like, oh, we need to like take this um road with documentation, it's like going in informed and saying, like, hey, like, I know we've been talking about like documentation, what to do next. Here are my points on it. Like, this is what I think we should do.
Mhm.
Like, enhance the search, or like make it simpler, or we have, like, looking at the analytics, we have 50 pages with no views from the past 6 months.
Mhm.
Let's, like, let's cull them because it's not polluting, but like, just it's rubbish basically. Like, it's just like it's not helping anyone. So like,
Yeah.
and then in terms of like AI optimization, like, if an agent or a chat, or like chat GPT, is scanning your doc site, less is more for them. Like, if they're looking at like multiple
Exactly.
versions and like content that might be out of date, and it's like, well, nobody was looking at it anyway, so let's update it. Then
Mhm.
answers are going to get better then if you're looking at it from that perspective as well. So it's,
Yeah.
I think ownership then is also coming with your own ideas, and then if your boss says, "Cool, let's run with idea A," and if idea A doesn't work out, it's putting your hand up and saying, okay, like, I got it wrong. I thought it would work, but here's
Yeah.
how, like, I think we should do it next time if we want to go
Mhm.
down this path again. So it's
Mhm.
having that accountability and that ownership over it to say, like, no, I want to run the show here, and I'm going to
Yeah.
take that for the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Mm. I love that. That's good.
Mhm.
It's been a quote. Yeah. So like how does an individual contribute now that we've spoken on ownership? So how let's talk on a bit on strategy before we move on to demonstrating value. So how does an individual contributor and a team or a documentation team become more strategic even if they don't manage a team, for instance, in your case?
I think it's about the way that I always do it, especially because like lean teams, I think this works really well,
Yeah.
is owning certain aspects of it. So it's like, okay, I really like to do feature work. I think I love learning about our new products and features that we're putting out. So it's like, okay, so this is the process that I had set up. Like, so then you can just hand them that and say, okay, like, if you want to own this process, that's fine. So like, look at it and tell me like what's working, what's not, and what can we change. And then, like, well, then they come with the plan themselves to say, like, oh, like, I think we should change this and that. And if they
Yeah.
have a good reason why, let, like, giving them the power and empowering them to go, okay, if you think this is a good idea, I don't have any like major reservations against it, let's do it. But if it doesn't work out, like, you have to own why it didn't work out. And it's
Yeah.
things like that. So it's not necessarily like owning like team level initiative. Well, no, sorry, they are team levels, but without being a manager, it's like, hey, like, I think we should optimize our backlog
Mhm.
because there's like 100 tickets in it, and I really want to prioritize it. And then, okay, go off and do that and come back to me with a plan of how you're going to do that. Or
Yeah.
even if it's like, if you really like, and when they build up that trust, like what I used to do was like, tell me what the plan is. Now what I kind of do is like, okay, um, if I when I start to like trust them more and more to like take on higher level tasks, it's okay, just you now own this section and you can just give me updates, be like, hey, I've made this change because of why. And like I'm not completely hands off. It's like, if you have a question, come to me, we'll work it out together. If you're like, I don't know what to do. And I do that with my writers as well. If I'm like if I'm looking at a page for too long, I'm like, I send it to a writer to be like, hey, I think I'm going crazy. Can you give this like a sanity check? Like, I see it like, you also have to see it as like a partnership. Just because you're a manager doesn't mean like you're like, I know you're like their actual manager, but it's not. In tech writing, I think it's a teamwork. Everyone, I think in tech writing, when you're a documentation manager, you're just the final say and overall responsibility. But it's like, when you have that partnership, what was it? One of my old bosses told me he saw his tech writing team as an authoritative democracy, which means everyone gets a vote, but he gets the final say. So it's like, if like, for example, if like, I think there was like 5 of us on the team back in those days, so like we all got like, if all of us said like we want to go with path A instead of path B, he was like, okay, let's do it. But if we were like going back and forth and saying, oh no, path A, path B, he would just step in and say, I think we're going with path A, decision done. So like, having somebody to make those hard calls, I think is very important. And I think that's kind of the difference. But I think as an individual contributor, it's just
Yeah.
owning certain aspects and stepping up to say, I'm going to own this part of the docs now. This is my plan. And then letting the manager go yes or no. And if they go
Mhm.
yes, then holding yourself accountable for that plan then. And not just
Yeah.
thinking, I see now, if I don't do it, it'll be fine. It's like, no, I'm going to do it. I've told them the deadline. And if it doesn't work out or it causes issues, I will be there to work it out, basically.
Mm. Makes sense. Makes sense. Thanks for sharing those tips. Those are really, really very valuable. So I think we can move on to discussing basically demonstrating documentation value, since we're like we
Yeah,
have like few minutes left. So so in terms of metrics, so when I think of documentation metrics, it's mostly like, oh, page views, was this
yeah,
helpful? Was this helpful? Very popular
yeah.
footnote. So
Mm.
beyond that, so what's one metric documentation teams rely on too much, and what's one they should now be paying more attention to now that AI has been introduced into the workflow? So if you had to choose just two or three of these metrics, what would you tell, or how would you rather, I think the best way to put it is, if you had to choose just two or three metrics that really tell you whether the documentation is succeeding, what would they be?
Yeah, just in terms of the whole like, was this helpful? I hate that.
Yeah. Ah.
Like when they
I don't
like
think
when they
anyone uses
like
that.
when they're like, give me a smiley face or a frowny face, I'm like, what does this tell me?
I
Like,
don't think
okay. And I often find that, at
yeah.
least on our doc side, not a lot of people use it. So I'm like,
Yeah.
but anyway, in terms of success metrics, I think the biggest one for me is deflection rates on support tickets.
Okay.
So um like, we have an AI chatbot, and like, that's the first port of call on our support side. And it's like understanding like, could your if the documentation had existed, or if it had been updated correctly, could we increase the deflection rate? So I think deflection rates are so important to understand. And I think that is a really good metric, because when you start increasing deflection rates, there's a real monetary value to that. Like, they like quantify it, like how much a ticket costs, and how many, like oh, if we hit 20% um deflection rate, it could be like a metric like 20% means like that equates to one whole support engineer. So I think showing business value, and like saying like, oh, if we got it to 50%, we'd save the company X amount of money.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really good, because like, that is a really quantifiable return on investment metric. And I think that's the one that really needs to be looked at and
Okay.
scrutinized, and understand what can we do. and getting feedback like knowledge gaps from that. Like, what were the questions that weren't answered, and can we add that to the docs? Like, for
Yeah.
example, something that we got back was like, oh, we need more information on like certain feature limitations, and then this is like the human in the loop, and where's our judgment needed? The AI also gives recommendations, so it's like, oh, you should create a page in your docs that talks about limitations. And where I kind of like human in the loop, and where our understanding is, I said, yes, like we do need to add limitations, but I don't think they should be like a separate page. I think they need to be where the user would encounter those limitations. Like, so instead of just adding documentation for the sake of it, it was like, okay, feature X only works on version blah de blah. Okay, so let's put that there then. And then it's like, or the limitate, so like encountering it, like the whole user experience, instead of them being like, oh, I wonder what the limitation is, let me go to a separate page to work that out. It's there where they need it. So that is one metric. The other metric that I think documentation doesn't spend enough time on is kind of like documentation health, I've started calling it. So it's like looking at page views by themselves, I don't think tell us that much, but page views cross reference with when was the last time a page was updated tells us a lot. So you look at like, this page has 100 views, if that's a lot, and then but it hasn't been updated in 6 months. Great. So we need to like, it's clearly a high priority right now. So let's update that, and because people are looking at it. Or if like you have a set of documentation, like somebody says, oh, I updated that set of documentation, you're looking at when none of them have any views in the past 3 months. So let's deprioritize that work and focus on something else. So it's a great way of prioritizing your backlog and that strategic vision. If you look at it and cross-reference those two metrics, you can start building out a strategic roadmap then to say like, and back it up with data. And then another metric that I think is really good is just qualitative customer feedback. I think we're a very data-driven industry, and I think there's something to be said for just hearing your docs were good or your docs were bad. And if you're
Yeah.
bad, why? Because like looking at the user experience as a whole. But the only downside to the qualitative stuff is, what I'll say is, what I always tell people is, when docs are good, it goes unnoticed. But when docs are bad, everyone notices.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
know that that's a very generic thing, but it's like you will always hear of your documentation not meeting a certain standard. But when it does hit a certain standard, it's invisible. So that's something that we all have to like, what would you say, balance? But yeah, those three metrics, I think, just because the last one, just because I think it can be either really good for user experience or it's just a good motivator. If you're sitting in front of a prospect or customer, they're like, oh yeah, I really liked your docs. And you're like, yes, thank God. I can do
Yeah.
something else. But yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I feel like at this point a lot of people are like taking notes on all the metrics to like look out for. So really interesting points you shared. So I think the final question would be, if someone watching today or someone who watches this recording afterward, if they had, if technical writer or documentation engineer whatsoever had
Mhm.
6 months to invest in themselves, where would you encourage them to focus on?
So what I always say is the foundations need to be perfect. Like, AI is only as good as what you put into it. So like making sure that like I'm looking into like how to write skills, but also making sure like you know how to create a style guide, and what does a good style guide look like if that is the path that you go down. Um, I would look more into kind of basic like coding if that is not your background, to understand why something works. Because like we can all vibe code, but understanding how a system works is so crucial. Um, Investing in themselves as well. What I would also do is just encourage to play around with it as well. Like I think in local environments, like I think if you're trying to be perfect first go, that's never going to work. I think something actually that I genuinely would invest in is the mindset of aim for better, not perfect. That's what I always, because I think as technical writers we tend to be perfectionists. It's just a personality trait. So I would also invest in a really good mindset to understand this pipeline like did not exist before. That is a step in the right direction. So I would start looking at like making sure your basics around documentation specialities um, are really good. So you're thinking like information architecture, like things like every page is page one, um, like things like that are really encouraging. Or
Yeah.
yeah, just trying to keep that up to date. Those kind of core foundational skills. Yeah, every page is page one. Like plain language guidelines, I think are always crucial. Information design practices like chunking, front loading, like understanding when to use those are crucial.
Okay.
And what I'd also look into, what helped me as well, is learning models. How do people learn? Because like documentation is a form of learning. So
Hmm.
looking into things like the VARC model, which is like visual, auditory, reading, writing, and kinesthetic. So like it's very general, but it's like it helps guide your understanding of like, okay, like should I put in like maybe GitHub code spaces here to help them like build something, or
Yeah.
do I need a diagram here because some people are visual, like not everyone wants to read through a step by step guide. Like, do I need, or like, and also understanding, because like this really helps with different evaluations of documentation. Like
Mhm.
somebody evaluating your documentation, maybe from a business perspective, doesn't really want to know about the detailed implementation steps, but a high level architecture of how it fits
Yeah,
in
sure.
might be
Hmm.
more beneficial. And then they hand it off to a tech lead and go, they tell them, hey, tell me, can you implement this based off what you see? And then they come back and say yes or no. So it's understanding all those aspects of it
Yeah.
and understanding what people need to know and when is very crucial.
Yeah. Mm.
Mhm.
Thanks. Thanks for sharing all those with everyone. So I just saw one question in the comment section. So if you have any questions, you can ask in the comment section. So I just saw one question about the good season of dogs. So unfortunately, Jon Snow, it's been discontinued as far as I can remember. I think it was concluded after like 6 years. So if you go to the website, if you go to the good season of dogs website, you see that it's no longer operating. So sorry about that. I don't know.
No.
That might that might be very disappointing, but yeah. So if you have
Um,
any questions in line with what we just discussed today, you can put them in the comment section. Otherwise, we call it a day. And we hope that everyone else who would watch this recording after, and for everyone who will join as well, we hope that you had like practical takeaways, because that was like the whole point of this webinar. And Gareth took his time to break down these practical steps you can take and apply to your own work, and things you can also learn. Very, very valuable conversation. This is so, I feel like I should literally maybe like write a post on everything Gareth has said here today, because it's really, yeah, we need more distribution channels because it's really valuable. So Gareth, thank you so much for doing this with me. I just knew it was going to be this good. So yeah. So
Thank
yeah.
you
So
for having me. I appreciate it.
my pleasure. So since we do not have any questions in the comment section, so I guess we can call it a day.
Okay.
Usually we close by. Usually usually we're done by I think we're done in 45 minutes, and this is
Mhm.
the first time I would overstay. So I apologize. I apologize. So yeah, so
No,
but
this
it was
was
really
amazing.
nice. Yeah, really nice, really nice, really nice, really helpful conversation.
Mhm.
So I guess I'll see you soon. Right.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, everyone.